What if I told you that the weed growing in the cracks of your driveway right now is something people have been fighting wars, writing poetry, and building entire diets around for over 6,000 years? And what if I told you it's sitting no more than a few feet from where I'm kneeling right now? I'm crouched down at the edge of my raised garden bed, right where the mulch meets the concrete walkway, because this is exactly where this plant loves to grow. It's a warm afternoon, the kind of heat that most other plants in this bed are wilting under, and yet this one right here is thick, glossy, and practically glowing with water, while everything around it looks tired and dry. Most people who see this plant do exactly one thing. They yank it out with their bare hands, toss it in the yard waste bin, and never think about it again. And I get it. It shows up uninvited. It spreads fast along the ground. It doesn't ask permission before it takes over a garden bed. But before you pull another one of these out of your yard, I want you to hear its story. Because this plant has fed pharaohs, philosophers, and prisoners of war. It's been carried as a good luck charm, and it might genuinely be one of the most important plants nobody in your neighborhood has ever noticed. This is Tom Harper with Backyard Wild, and today, right here at the edge of my own garden, in the heat of summer, we're talking about purslane. Let me show you exactly what you're looking for, because if you're ever going to eat anything out of your yard, you need to be able to identify it with total, complete confidence. Purslane grows low and flat, almost like it's hugging the ground on purpose, spreading outward in a dense mat that can stretch a foot or two across in every direction from a single root. It never really stands up tall the way a lot of other so-called weeds do. Instead, it sprawls, branching out in every direction from the center like a little green starburst pressed flat against the soil. The stems are the first thing that'll catch your eye. They're thick, smooth, and reddish, almost like a little vein running along the ground, and they're absolutely loaded with moisture. If you pinch one of these stems between your fingers, you'll feel right away just how rubbery and full it is, almost like a tiny cactus paddle rather than a typical garden weed. The leaves are small, paddle-shaped or teardrop-shaped, thick and shiny, a deep waxy green that almost seems to shine in direct sunlight. They cluster together in little rosettes right where the stem branches, kind of like tiny clovers made out of jade. And if you run your thumb over one, it feels cool and slightly slick, almost succulent, because that's essentially what this plant is. It's a succulent that happens to grow in your vegetable bed instead of a desert windowsill. In the heat of summer, you'll notice small yellow flowers opening up right at those leaf joints. But here's an interesting detail. They usually only open during the brightest part of the morning, closing back up again by early afternoon, almost like the plant is conserving its own energy during the hottest hours of the day. Later in the season, those flowers give way to tiny seed capsules, and those capsules do something genuinely clever. When the seeds inside are finally ripe, the very top of the pod pops open on a hinge, almost like a little trap door swinging outward, releasing dozens of small black seeds to scatter in the wind or fall into the surrounding soil. That single plant, if left alone, can produce enough seed to guarantee its return year after year in the exact same spot. And here's the detail I really want you to hold on to. This plant is almost entirely water by weight. Break open one of those thick stems and you'll feel just how juicy it really is. That succulence is exactly what lets purslane survive and even thrive in cracked sidewalks, gravel driveways, compacted parking lots, and bone-dry garden beds where almost everything else around it has already given up for the season. Now, here's the part I really need you to pay attention to, because it matters for your safety, not just your curiosity. There is a look-alike out there, and it is absolutely not something you want to eat. It's called spotted spurge, and it grows in that exact same cracked, sun-baked soil, in that exact same low, spreading mat, sometimes tangled right up alongside real purslane in the very same patch. From a few feet away, an untrained eye could easily mix the two up, because the growth habit looks so similar at a glance. But there is one simple test that settles it every single time, no guessing required. Snap the stem. If the sap that comes out is clear and watery, almost like what you'd get from slicing into a cucumber, you are holding purslane. If the sap runs milky white, the way a broken dandelion stem bleeds, you are holding spurge, and that plant can irritate your skin and stomach if handled or eaten carelessly. Clear sap, purslane. Milky sap, spurge. That's the rule, and I want you to actually perform that test yourself every single time before you ever put a wild plant into your mouth. Never eat anything you've foraged unless you are completely certain of the identification, and if you have any doubt at all, even a small one, just leave it in the ground and walk away. So why does everybody treat this plant like public enemy number one in the garden? Mostly because of where and how it shows up. Nobody plants purslane on purpose. It volunteers itself in vegetable beds, in the gaps between patio stones, along gravel driveways, in parking lot cracks, in the driest, most neglected corners of the yard where the homeowner has basically given up trying to grow anything at all. Because it appears completely uninvited and spreads so efficiently once it takes hold, it gets lumped in with every other nuisance weed and sprayed or pulled without a second thought, right alongside crabgrass and creeping Charlie. But here's the truth that flips this entire story upside down. This plant carries one of the highest levels of plant-based omega-3 fatty acids of any leafy green that's ever been measured by researchers. Studies analyzing its nutrient profile have found that a 100-gram serving, roughly a cup of fresh leaves, carries somewhere around 3 to 400 milligrams of alpha-linolenic acid, which is the plant-based form of omega-3, and that number puts purslane well ahead of spinach and most of the other leafy greens we typically eat. It also carries meaningful amounts of vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin E, potassium, and magnesium, and some researchers have even found that chickens fed a diet supplemented with purslane go on to lay eggs with noticeably higher omega-3 content than normal. Think about that for a second. This is a plant that people spray with herbicide, growing quietly in the cracks of their own driveway, that happens to be more nutritionally dense, gram for gram, than a lot of what's sitting under the misting sprayers in the produce aisle. Now let's go back further, because the story of this plant is genuinely one of the oldest food stories on the planet. The name purslane comes down to us through Old French, from a word that eventually became porcelain, and further back than that, the plant's scientific name, portulaca, comes from the Latin word portula, meaning little gate or little door. That name is a direct reference to how the seed capsule actually works, popping open on a hinge like a tiny trap door when the seeds inside are ripe. Exactly the mechanism I described a moment ago. The ancient Greeks knew this plant intimately. The philosopher Theophrastus wrote about it in the 4th century BC as one of the standard summer pot herbs that households sowed every spring without fail. A few centuries later, the physician Dioscorides, writing while serving with the Roman army, recommended the leaves for headaches, heartburn, and various other complaints, and noted that the juice was used to soothe irritated eyes. Around that same era, Pliny the Elder, the great Roman naturalist, was so convinced of this plant's protective power that he recommended people wear a small amulet containing purslane on their body to ward off illness and misfortune entirely. Now, we know today that carrying a plant charm around your neck doesn't actually cure disease, but think about what that tells us. This wasn't some minor backyard nuisance to the ancient world. This was a plant people trusted enough to carry pressed against their own skin. Archaeological evidence pushes this story even deeper into the past than written history can reach. Seeds have been recovered from the Slovenian coast dating back to the early Neolithic period, 6 to 8,000 years ago. It's documented in classical Egypt. It shows up in the writing of Columbus himself, who reported seeing it growing in Cuba back in 1492. And remarkably, it shows up independently on the other side of the world too, with seeds and pollen recovered from sites in southern Illinois dated to roughly 2,000 years ago, long before any European contact with the Americas. It was formally documented in the American colonies not long after, first identified in Massachusetts in 1672, brought along, much like dandelion and plantain, in the herb gardens of early settlers who considered it an important remedy against scurvy on long voyages. That's part of what makes this particular plant so remarkable in the history of human food. It wasn't only carried across the ocean by settlers the way so many of our other backyard weeds were. In many parts of North America, it appears to have already been here, used by indigenous communities, including the Cherokee and the Ojibwe, thriving completely independently, while the exact same plant was also being cultivated across Europe, Asia, and the entire Mediterranean world. Very few food plants anywhere in the world have that kind of a truly global, ancient, and independently discovered history, and the notable names attached to this plant don't stop in the ancient world at all. Henry David Thoreau, writing about his time at Walden Pond, described sitting down to a simple dinner of purslane that he'd gathered right there in the field near his cabin, and finding it entirely satisfying on its own, with nothing more than a little salt. Mahatma Gandhi was known to favor this plant as a regular part of his diet as well. In Japan, purslane is one of the 7 symbolic herbs used in a traditional New Year's ritual dish meant to bring good health for the coming year. In Mexico and across Central America, it's called verdolaga, and it's simmered into soups and stewed together with pork in dishes that have been passed down for generations. In the Middle East, it's a key ingredient in the mixed salad called fattoush. In China, it's stir-fried quickly in sesame oil alongside bean sprouts, and traditional healers there gave it a name that translates roughly to vegetable for long life. And even in modern times, this plant had its own little cultural moment. Back in the late 1990s, it started appearing on high-end restaurant menus across New York City as a trendy wild vegetable, to the point that a well-known food writer devoted an entire newspaper piece to what she called the weed that was suddenly wowing the city. I do want to be careful here, because a lot of the old medicinal claims attached to this plant, treating everything from headaches to infections to digestive troubles, come from traditional folk belief passed down over centuries, not from verified modern medical guidance, and I'm not telling you to treat this plant as medicine in any way. But what every single one of these traditions shares, across cultures that had no contact with each other whatsoever, is a consistent, enduring respect for this plant as food. That's not a coincidence. That's an old pattern, quietly repeating itself in almost every corner of the globe. So here's what I actually want you to do with all of this. The next time you spot that low reddish mat of glossy leaves creeping along your garden bed or filling the cracks in your driveway, don't reach straight for the sprayer. Get down close to it, snap a stem, and check the sap. Clear and watery means you've got real purslane, and you can go ahead and harvest the young, tender growth right at the tips, which is where the best texture and mildest flavor tend to be. Rinse it thoroughly, and you can eat it completely raw, tossed straight into a salad, where it adds a mild crunch with just a slight lemony tang. You can saute it quickly with a little garlic and olive oil, the way it's traditionally prepared across the Mediterranean, or stir it directly into a simmering soup, the way it's used in Mexican and Chinese kitchens alike. The season for the best, most tender growth generally runs from early summer through the first frost, so this is really a plant at its absolute peak right now. Just like with any wild plant you intend to eat, only harvest from soil you know for certain hasn't been treated with herbicide or pesticide, and stay well clear of anything growing right along a busy roadside where it may have picked up runoff and pollutants from passing traffic. And I'll say it one more time because it genuinely matters. If there's any doubt at all in your mind about the identification, don't eat it. Let it go. There will always be another patch waiting for you tomorrow. I really hope this changed the way you'll look at that little patch of purslane the next time you spot it creeping along your walkway. It's easy to overlook something that grows quietly in the cracks of a driveway, but this is a plant that's traveled alongside humanity since long before the pyramids were ever built, fed philosophers and settlers and everyday families through hard times, and it's still sitting right there in your backyard today, patiently waiting for somebody to finally notice it. If you enjoyed learning about this one, I'd really appreciate it if you'd hit subscribe, drop a like, and leave me a comment letting me know if you've spotted purslane growing near you this summer. I've got a lot more of these overlooked backyard plants coming up on this channel, so stick around, because you honestly never know what's hiding right outside your own door. Thanks so much for watching.